Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Billy Watson TV. It gives me great pleasure once again to have a returning guest on, Mr. Sage of Quay himself, Mr. Mike Williams. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing well, Billy. Thank you again for having me back on your show.
That's awesome. I'll keep on track with what you're doing, and you've just done another presentation. It's actually revisited a 4.5 hour one you done, I think it was in 2020 maybe?
Yeah, 3 years ago.
Yeah, did the Beatles write their own music? So since then, some other interviews and stuff have come up. So you went and done an addendum to that, which I've watched a couple of times now. And to me, you've basically blown out the water, especially when you hear the Beatles themselves and George Martin saying their own words, what you've been putting out there for the past couple of years. So we'll expand on the points that you maybe start with the points that were originally made and then go into this new stuff. Where would you like to start this discussion? Did the Beatles write all their own music as a topic, but any of it is the real question?
Yeah, that is the real question, right? So what happened, Billy, is I published the original presentation, Did the Beatles Write All Their Own Music, back on April 1st of 2020. And, there are folks out there that don't understand the true meaning of April 1st.
Yep.
It ties back to the tarot card. It has a lot of occulted meaning. And Billy is the fool on the hill.
This is Billy Shepherd, for those that are catching up, know me.
Billy Shears, yeah, Billy Shears, a.k.a. Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
And the tarot card and the Fool, it represents new beginnings and somebody who is willing to take risk in order to capitalize on opportunity. And that's why it was released on April 1st. So I knew a lot of the audience would not get it, but I wasn't really concerned about the audience getting it. I was more focused on Billy and the inner circle, understanding why I uploaded the video on that day. So since then, I have been putting out a lot of content to kind of build upon
just on that note. So in other words, you're kind of acting the way that the so-called Illuminati, whatever, do their things as well, because they time things to calendars and with significant meaning. So people can look at you and say, you're doing this, you must be one of them then,
Oh, yeah, I know. I get that all the time because they'll look at certain, videos and it has a certain runtime and all that stuff. And, they'll say, oh, the runtime totals to the number 11, or it totals to the number 6, or the totals to the number 9. Sometimes I will make it total to those numbers. Other times it's coincidental. It just happens to be that way. But, yeah, I mean, they're
using these dates and stuff like that. It's kind of like they don't own this kind of knowledge. It's there for everyone, and they make it seem it's the dark side doing all the triangles. But that's a powerful symbol. You know what I mean? These dates and cards, they have significance. We can use them too.
Yes, exactly. That's the point. The point is, you can use the symbols too, which includes the numbers, and you can leverage your own message the way they go about leveraging their message, doing those types of maneuvers, using occultism, using numerology and all that stuff. I mean, I'm not an occultist, but I know enough about their numbers and the numerology to work it so that if I can put a presentation out that can benefit from the numbers, then I have done that.
So you released the first one, did you, on April 1st, 2020? Because you've just done the addendum on April the 1st.
Yes, so the addendum was also released on April 1st
of
2023, which was exactly 36 months to the day. 3 + 6 = 9.
Yeah.
You see?
Mm-hmm.
So, so, I have some fun with it. Let's just put it that way. I have some fun with it. They play with the numbers. And when I talk about they folks, I'm talking about the controllers. They paint by the numbers. And, if we go about our lives just hiding from the symbolism and not really understanding the true intent of the symbolism, then we're not doing ourselves any good. You see, behind all the symbols, behind all the numbers, Billy, I know you know this, it's about intent. If you have good intent, then good things follow. If you have bad intent, then bad things follow. It's like when somebody asks the question, is electricity good or bad? Well, it depends on how electricity is being used. If you're going to the electric chair, probably not so good, right?
For you.
But if you need it to light your house, then it's a good thing. But the problem we have in society as a whole is so many folks, they don't understand. They don't understand how the world really works. And you and I talked about this before we started the show. They don't understand that there's a complete controlling matrix or apparatus that controls this reality from beginning to end, cradle to grave.
Yep.
And so many folks, they don't understand it. Not only do they not want to do they not understand it, but they also don't want to research it when you try to explain it to them. I can't tell you how many times when I talk about Tavistock, most folks, they have no comprehension, even though they'll say, "Oh, I know all about Tavistock." Now, you don't know squat about Tavistock, and I can tell just by the way that you're commenting that you have no idea what Tavistock is all about. How it's all tied into the Fabian Society, the Rockefeller Foundation, to the Council on Foreign Relations, the Committee of 300, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergs, Davos. These organizations, they're all, this is the internationalist structure that is ruling the world. And if you don't want to take the time to understand it, then you're going to be at a disadvantage. And Tavistock, it's not just about mind control from the standpoint of a lot of people just think mind control is hypnosis. No, it's not. The stuff that they're into will make your eyes cross. They have fully adopted occultism and magic into their portfolio of how they get things done. And to really get an understanding of it, there's a book I recommend. It's by Daniel Estulin, Estulin. And Daniel wrote the book going back about, 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago. Read that book. It's about 200, 250 pages. And you'll have a very, very clear understanding of Tavistock and its tentacles and how very, very far-reaching it is. It has permeated virtually their philosophies, their approach, and their techniques has permeated just about every aspect of society. And so that's why a lot of people, they just can't get their heads wrapped around a lot of things because they just can't fathom that the controllers, that their mechanisms are that onerous, that they are that wide-reaching. And the thing is, until people actually begin to understand that, nothing will change. Because if you remain in a position of unknowing and ignorance, they're going to capitalize and leverage your ignorance and your unknowing. And they're just going to blow right past you. And this is really why we're in the situation we're in the world. It's because most people are clueless as to how the world really works. And because of that, this agenda basically goes forward with very little resistance. There's just you and there's me and there's many others that are doing this type of work to try to expose what's really going on. But the vast majority of the people have no understanding whatsoever.
Well, even if you just say that Paul McCartney was replaced, even though there is rumours about it, most people will just dismiss that out of hand as well. And, that's just a small aspect. Did the Beatles write their own music's kind of taking it to the next level? I guess they're two similar things, but, it's just, the lie's just all encompassing. It's just so huge. It's like you can't see the wood for the trees because, it's like the fish can't see the water, because it's all around them. And to even begin to go into that, it's just like daunting. So it's the old cognitive dissonance, pretend it's not happening and try and live your existence in this reality and, go to your work and forget about it. But yeah, things have consequences. Lack of knowledge, then you go and take whatever they're giving you and stuff like that, Still visit your doctor and things because of your ignorance, So you pay for it ultimately.
You do ultimately pay for it. And, the Beatles conspiracy is no different than so many other conspiracies and psychological operations that have taken place. We know the Kennedy assassination, right? A lot of people.
In the thing you brought up, the fact that it was the same day, was that Beatlemania kind of came in just as that happened. It was like a switch.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So what Billy's referring to is, if we go back to Please Please Me, that was released on March 22nd. That's 322. That's Skull and Bones, which goes back to Genesis 3:22. So go to your Bibles and read Genesis 3:22. Okay. And they released with the Beatles on November 22nd, 1963 in the UK. They waited to release it in the United States, but in the UK it was released on the very same day. So,
right.
We had the Kennedy assassination and then the Beatles roll out.
Yeah.
Right. It was from a psychological operation perspective, it's the natural order of things. You have this very, very disturbing event, the president of the United States being assassinated, and then they introduce this very uplifting event. See, that's trauma-based. That's trauma-based mind control, right? Everybody thinks trauma-based mind control is only negative stuff, and that's incorrect. There's negative and positive reward.
Yeah.
This is how they do it. So, people, they just can't get their arms wrapped around the Beatles being a conspiracy because it's a feel-good story. I've said in so many other shows that how could you not like the Beatles' Cinderella story? How could you not like that? 4 lads from Liverpool connect with Brian Epstein, a record store owner who gets them signed to a major label, EMI, under the tutelage of George Martin, and then go on to unprecedented fame and fortune, and thinking it's organic. Once you understand how the world really works, that has no semblance at all of being natural or organic, because this world is controlled. And one of the major levers, if not one of the largest levers in the toolbox of the controllers, is the music and entertainment industry. Yeah. Hollywood, as an example. This is how they shape your minds. This is how they get to change your belief system, how they get you to change your values, how they get you to change what is acceptable. There would be situations where you didn't accept certain types of societal behavior. And then after a long-running psychological operation, people get worn down. And as they get worn down, a lot of them become apathetic. And if they don't become apathetic, they just openly accept the new change, because many times they paint it in a way which is, hey, this is good stuff. This is good stuff. Hop on board the train, because we're going to a good place. You're not going to a good place at all.
Just talking about the control in society and the music, I watched a documentary recently with James Rio Dio. You know that guy Dio? He was in Black Sabbath. He appeared in that occasionally, and he was just saying, he was doing really well. He'd done a solo album or something, and then all of a sudden they were going to change, and the whole his type of music just at the start of the 80s was going into this box, and he said to the producer something, his mind going in there, says, "Yep, poof," and then he was old school. He had to fight his way back, and through the popularity of Black Sabbath, where we got back in with them, and then got Dio famous again, through his hard work, but really they were ditched. It was just kind of that realization that, hold on a minute, I thought this was natural and it was all kind of, I'm good, and it was all of a sudden you're not wanted anymore, end of. That was quite a big shock to him, but that just shows you how they can bring in the new trends like punk or whatever when they want, and that's how controlled it is. Like, this type of music for this time will serve that purpose. Once it's done, that can't last forever, so we need to change it up, whatever. And now this is a new thing. And even, I think when rock and roll started, they had to have people like Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell and all these really fantastic, great artists to establish the art form. And then over the years, they've just totally degraded it to where you're getting, Miley Cyrus and all this doing all kinds of stuff on stage. Like Madonna. You see her on Jimmy Kimmel last week?
No, I didn't see that. I try not to watch Madonna at all.
Well, she was simulating giving oral sex. Showing her butt. It was pretty bad.
See, what they did was they had to start at a very conservative point.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
I had this discussion, I think with Jay Widener or Crow. They start at a certain point because that is an acceptable starting point from the standpoint of what the public will tolerate at that point. You know, it's a little new, it's intriguing. So they can't be over the top initially. So then, slowly but surely, I mean, the stake I put in the ground is 1960. And I know it started before 1960, folks. I'm just talking about, we're talking about the music business. And I know, Elvis was part of it too. And I know Elvis goes back into the 50s, but we're just starting with 1960, just a nice round number to move forward from. And take a look at where they've taken music and entertainment since the 1960s. I mean, it's not even close to being the same or similar. It's very, very different. And it has become very dark, and it has become very decadent, and it's extremely ritualistic. Because as I mentioned when we first started the show, this world is run by occultists. It's not run by your president. It's not run by your prime minister. They are all figureheads. They are all puppets. A lot of these prime ministers, like Trudeau up in Canada, they're all tied back to the World Economic Forum. Young world leaders. I think that's the program that the WEF has put in place and has been in place for a long time. And so they're placing these players in key positions throughout the world. And if it's not a prime minister or a president, then these people are inserted into cabinet positions.
Well, did you hear the one about Jacinda fucking Ardern is being given a position in high up in the royal family by Prince William?
Yeah, there you go. Right.
It's unbelievable.
Right.
So that just shows you again how much they're all part of the World Economic Forum system as well. Prince Charles is on board with that, well, King Charles, kind of, get my head around that. But yeah, it's just a big gang, isn't it? A big cult, and people are just used to being taking their orders from them, and nanny state will take care of things. Meanwhile, nanny state are setting up your prison.
Well, that's why they're referred to as the cultic elite. It is a cult, and they are occultists. And their occultism involves it's magic, it's ritual, it's alchemy, it's mysticism, it's all of that stuff. Numerology, gematria, all of this stuff. We know signs and symbols rule the world. I've said this so many times in so many shows. And I still get people that say things like, oh, I don't think the numbers mean anything. I think numbers only mean something when you're at the cash register at the supermarket and you're buying bread and milk and I need change. You have no idea how profane that is. So until a critical mass of folks get on board with how this place really operates, then put your seatbelt on, because it's going to get rockier and rockier, and the ride's going to get rougher and rougher. And, for a lot of folks, this stuff is rolling up on their doorstep as we speak. They're starting to really feel it now. And even then, they're still in denial. They just think it's some coincidental situation or circumstance that has overtaken their life at this point, and they can't connect it back to a much larger agenda that's in place.
I mean, talking about magic and stuff like this in the Tavistock, then the Beatles having Aleister Crowley and all we know about his connections. So the Tavistock's obviously influenced by these kind of magicians, controls of reality. So that's what they used the Beatles for. That was a pure magic. They've came in with this, God knows how long they've been planning it for, but it seems like they've had this agenda. I don't know if Brian Epstein's got the word with Tavistock, because he's had £1 million in to go and promote the Beatles in ’63 or whatever, which is guaranteeing them a success. Just two years from Germany, they're on the Ed Sullivan Show or whatever. That doesn't happen just by accident, because there's money agenda. I don't think it was Brian Epstein's money, So where's he getting that money from? The powers that be that have this agenda, and they've played it out to a T. They totally transformed the 60s with predominantly the Beatles at the head of this movement, the hippie tune in, drop in. Obviously, right. Tim Leary and all these people, the Merry Pranksters, are all part of it. So yeah, big massive CIA operation to get people to be hippies and wasters and not be critical thinking, well-rounded people, because obviously after the war there was that generation not wanting the old way anymore. They knew they were going to be a problem, so get them loaded up and make money off them while they're doing it.
Yeah, so the $1 million, right, that Brian Epstein had, this goes back to the interview that I put in the big presentation. I also had it in another presentation or two with Bernard Purdy, saying that Brian Epstein had $1 million in his pocket, and that was the money that was behind the Beatles at that point in time. Now, to put that into context, that's almost $10 million today in today dollars. I think it's like 9.7 or $9.8 million. And where do you get that money from? Well, EMI was tied into British intelligence and the British military, and was very active during World War II. And EMI is also tied into Tavistock. So, once you know this, once you know how things connect, then the whole thing with the Beatles and these other bands, because it's just not the Beatles, it makes more and more sense. So they paint this very happy, like I said, Cinderella story to the public, to the naive, to those that really don't understand how things work, and they just embrace it. They adopt the story. They love it. Like I said, look, I was a believer in that story at one time. So I'm not sitting here just knocking people. I'm knocking myself too, because up until 2016, I used to believe the Beatles story. So, so there's, the connection points, Billy. I mentioned a bunch of them before. The Council on Foreign Relations, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Fabian Society, the Bilderbergs, the Trilaterals, Davos, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations. You have all of these. What do people think that these internationalist organizations are in place to do? You think they just put buildings up and they sit there and do nothing all day? That they play solitaire on their computer screen? These internationalist structures are there for a reason. And they're there to run the world.
Yeah, totally organised, the other side, aren't they? They go about their business every day with this agenda they've got, and we're just flapping around watching Coronation Street at night time or something, and
right.
We're not organised. Even food, we can't even supply our own food. We're dependent on the shops. Again, we're totally
right.
Electricity goes off, we're lost.
Hey, what happened when the event took place back in March of 2022, and we had a shortage of toilet paper? Yeah. What did that tell you? People got very concerned because they couldn't wipe their butts, right?
Aye.
And what were the controllers telling everybody? We'll tell you when you can wipe your ass.
Aye. Exactly.
Because if we decide not to put toilet paper out, then
what are you going to do?
What are you going to do, right? So this is their way of poking at people, and their way of making it understood that this is part of the trauma-based mind control. They'll do things like this.
Yeah.
And then as fast as it came, it goes away.
Aye.
But and then they'll do something else.
Those in the back of your mind, that could happen. There's a shortage. Even now, there's quite a lot of fruit and vegetables that are not making the shelves here.
Right. Same here.
Aye.
But going back to just to round out this whole thing with Tavistock and these genres of music, the British invasion was completely created by Tavistock. People ask me questions like, well, what about the Who? The Who were part of the British invasion. They were a creation of Tavistock as well, because Tavistock created the British invasion. It goes with the Rolling Stones. It goes with all of them. And all of these genres of music that follow, they all had a social engineering purpose. There was an agenda behind all of these different genres of music. And, and you have to, people have to stop. Look, folks, you got to stop worshiping artists and bands and celebrities and entertainers. Because there's a great movie people should watch. It's a series, actually. It's 3 seasons. It's called American Gods. And American Gods spells it out very clearly. That everything people are doing today with all of this idolizing and being plugged into social media and sitting in front of your screen and doing Facebook all day and stupid shit like that. All you're doing is you're feeding what American gods refer to as the technology gods. And what they mean by that is they are taking your energy, they are usurping your consciousness and your physical energy because you're sitting in front of that monitor all day, posting inane pictures, typing out stupid comments all day, doing inane stuff. And they're leveraging that. So while most people, a lot of people, are sitting there doing that type of activity all day, the world is passing them by. A lot of stuff is getting done, flying under the radar because you are focused on the wrong things. You're focused on nonsense. And most people have a total lack of ability to prioritize what's really important in their life. You know, it's just amazing to me. So anyway, I don't want to, you know.
I just want to finish on that wee bit because I watched it. I was going to send it to you. There's a documentary recently on BBC about the Rolling Stones. And it's a similar kind of thing where they're talking about it in code. They're kind of like Bill Wyman even says, you know, why let the truth get in the way of a good story? And, you know, it's almost like it's happening to them. All of a sudden they've got this audience and again, they're just caught in the eye of the storm almost. So I'll send it to you because we did have that chat about the Stones as well. So yeah, again, they do the masterful speaking where you can watch it, the documentary one way without knowing all this stuff and you're like, oh wow, yeah, and you just automatically assume certain things that they're not fully giving you the picture. And then when you understand the truth, you say, they're saying it like that, but they're not actually, you know, like for instance, they're in the studios of Wild Horses, but you don't see them recording it.
Right.
Just things like that. So
yeah, Wild Horses is one of those stories that if you sit back and you actually critically think and you're objective, you should be able to connect the dots and figure out that story that's told in the Muscle Shoals documentary about how Wild Horses got written and recorded in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. That story is a fictional account. It's not true. You know, and there are so many stories like that. You know, folks don't understand. Like they will point to certain bands and artists, singers, and they will just blindly accept whatever they say in an interview or some kind of rock documentary that you might find, you know, on Netflix or something. What they don't understand is these folks are performers; they are entertainers.
Yeah.
So part of their responsibility to be a successful entertainer and performer is to embellish stories, to create fantastical stories, rags to riches or whatever the storyline is, to pull you in. But you have to use discernment to, you know, and figure out that most of this stuff is completely made up. It's not, you know, it's not true. It's not true. And but this is the problem, you know, when you accept the pop culture, when you embrace the pop culture, you're in big trouble. Because the pop culture, its intent is to pull you away from your true identity. It's to pull you away from your sovereign self. It's to pull you away from pursuing your own pure or true will.
Yep.
And disempowering yourself and giving your authority. You're supposed to be your own authority. And then taking your authority and then handing it off to somebody else. That's what the pop culture is all about. It's stripping you of being a human being. It's stripping you of having a soul.
Yep. I'm getting, you know, just I can't really be asked with even any more Facebook and Twitter. You're supposed to do it in their position and get involved, but to me, it's just you're fighting the big hundreds of people throwing stuff at this thing, and unless you've got a team behind you and, you know, money and stuff like that, then it's just like, who needs it? You know,
right?
I'll just live my life and just do what I do, and, you know, c'est la vie, whatever happens, happens, because it's just too much pain. It's like a big war. Oh, good to get this hit, and, you know, I could never get involved in it.
No.
But well done to those that do and use the keywords correctly. But then anytime they can come and strike you off and ban you anyway. So, you know, just you can waste a lot of time pissing about in the technology that's here to save us, but it's not making things any better or people any smarter, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about banning and stuff like that. I had a situation going back about a week ago, right? So I'll just run through this real quick. I'll just explain the types of shenanigans that they do behind the scenes, right? So I had a couple of videos up on my Paul is Dead channel, and so there are two views of how many views the video has. There's the analytic view, which is a view that is that the content creator sees. It's on their dashboard, and then there's the public view, right?
Yeah.
So if I go into my analytics, I had one show. It's the show I did with Amanda.
Yeah.
The internal analytic count of the views was over 12,000. The public view was 9,000.
Unbelievable.
Okay? And I had another situation like that with the show I did with Kat from Supernatural Beatles. It wasn't as large a gap. I think it was maybe 500 or 600 views. That was the gap, where it was higher in the analytics dashboard. And so I contacted YouTube. Right. So if you're, if you have a monetized channel and stuff like that, you're in the partner program, so you can get a hold of them. And so, I get this person on the phone. He was very nice. His name was Mike as well. And I said, he goes, "How can I help you?" I said, "Well, you can help me understand, Mike. How is it that the view count in my analytics is 3,000 views higher than what you're showing the public?" And so he said, "Well, hold on a second." So I gave him the two, the URLs, the links. So he comes back. He says, "Yeah, I see that." I said, "Okay, good. I'm glad you see it too. We both see it." I said, "Now, what are we going to do about it?" I mean, the public view is supposed to reflect what's being shown in the analytics. He goes, "Well, we're working on it." I'm like, okay. So you know what their fix was, Billy? To lower the analytics view down to the public view.
Joking.
I'm like, it's unbelievable.
The trusted analytics, they're supposed to be the thing, but no, we'll just chop them.
Yeah, we'll just take that out. We'll just take that out because we don't want your videos to have a higher view count, right? Because they want the lower view count because aesthetically it would say that there's less interest in the video or the presentation, right? But this is what goes on all the time. The censorship and the shenanigans behind the scenes. Anyway, I just figured I would throw that one out there. I mean, there's nothing you could do about it. And actually, when I saw the analytic number come down like a day or two later down to the public view, I just started laughing. I thought to myself, well, that is one way to fix it.
True. Yeah, and it's a wee reveal, though. It'd be another wee insight into how they go about their dodgy dealings. So,
yeah.
Well, let's get on the topic then of this presentation you've done, and going back to the one in 2020, you've done the 4.5 hour one, laid the groundwork for it all, and basically you started with Rubber Soul, and how that was the story of within 30 days they went in, or 37 days they went in and wrote all their own tracks, recorded them, and produced them, mastered them, and pumped them out. And you kind of hold on a minute, that doesn't seem right.
Right.
And then from there, you've took it further to say about practically all their albums, especially the early ones before Sgt. Pepper, certainly seem to be all produced, etc., by George Martin, and the Wrecking Crew model. Would you like to go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So what happened was the way I got into the original April 2020 presentation, I went and I bought this DVD. It's a series called Deconstructing the Beatles. And they're very good presentations, but it is a presentation of the official narrative, but it's very well done. And the person who does them is Scott Fryman. So, Scott does his thing. He does a great job at presenting the official narrative. And I have no idea whether he believes it or not. It doesn't really matter, right? Because I was watching the DVD and he was doing a good job of presenting it. So the premise behind Deconstructing the Beatles and the Rubber Soul album was that they came into the studio with really no backlog of music. They came in empty. I think that's what his term was. They came in really empty.
And the studios are expensive, so it's not really a good idea to be doing that anyway.
No. The problem with it is, we'll get into that. Yeah, that's a good point. Just remember that when we'll get back to it. Is the premise is that they were going to have to write 16 brand new songs, original compositions, within 30 days. Now, it's 37 days when we count to when the lacquer was cut. But the Beatles themselves had 30 days.
It wasn't necessarily 16 songs. It was enough songs to fill up an album, but it turned out to be 16.
Well, it was 14 for the album and 2 for a single, right? A double A-side single, which was Day Tripper and We Can Work It Out. That was the single. And so as I'm watching this, I'm a musician, I'm a songwriter, and, I record. And I'm thinking to myself, but that's not possible. It's not possible. How could you come into a studio and be guaranteed, number one, that you're going to knock out 16 songs in 30 days? You can't guarantee that. And they needed to get an album out for the Christmas season, and the album had to be in stores by December 3rd. So the Beatles came in on October 11th of 1965, and then their last day of recording was November 11th of 65. So that's the third period of time.
Did they not actually cut the US tour short as well? Did they have extra dates or something like
That's
that?
the story. The story in Deconstructing Rubber Soul is they had to cut the American tour short in order to make this happen. But that's kind of a weird scenario, because they cut it short, yet they still had about 6 weeks in between when the tour ended and when they walked into EMI Studios on October 11th, right? So that's kind of one of those kind of weird narratives. There's a lot of weirdness in the narrative when you really look at it, things that really don't make sense, right? So you would think if they had to cut the tour short, that they wouldn't have given them, 6 weeks of holiday or vacation before coming in. You would say, hey, we got to get an album done. You guys need to end the tour and get writing like right now. Start right now, not when you get to the studio. But in any case, so the story is that they were going to write from scratch, then rehearse. A lot of people just skip the whole rehearsal piece of this thing. They think you write songs and then you just record them. No, you've got to write songs, and then you have to rehearse the songs. And that in itself is a process, right? I mean, I was in bands years ago, and I was writing original music, and I would bring the songs into my bandmates, and I would say, "Hey, this is what I wrote. What do you guys think?" Like, "Hey, it's good," or "Hey, we don't think it's that good." But if it's good, then what happens is we continue to work on the song, and there's going to be changes to the song based upon band input. Yeah, the drummer might say, "Hey, let's do a break here," and or the keyboard player might say, "Hey, we're going to do this." So, in other words, it's an interactive process. It's iterative.
But even in the past, lots of bands would have their songs they would write, and then they would tour them for like a year, and then record them. And that whole process of touring them gets the song to where it is the song. Right. A lot of bands these days release the track, and then they go live with it, and then that's when the song becomes what it's supposed to be.
Yeah. So what happened was, I looked at that documentary and I said, there's no way. So I started looking into it.
Especially the quality of the album as well. It's not just some ramshackle put together. Those songs are amazing.
No,
you know what I mean?
No.
Can't go in.
Yeah, so there were two issues with Rubber Soul. There's two major issues. The first issue is writing 16 songs in 30 days. And there are folks out there that have never written a song in their life. They're not musicians. They haven't recorded anything. They don't understand the process. Yet they think they're an expert on how this process works with regard to songwriting, rehearsal, recording, mixing, and so on. Yeah. So the good thing is on my channel, I have a lot of songwriters, musicians, some producers, and whenever I put this work out, I say I focus on those people that count. And what I mean by that is these are people that know the process and understand the business.
Yeah.
So when they step forth and they say, "No, Mike, you got it right. It's absolutely correct," that didn't happen. That's what counts.
Yeah.
Right? Not somebody who is emotionally tied to it because they love the story and they are so immersed in the conditioning and so dogmatic about it that they can't critically think. They can't break the programming. So they're coming at it from a very emotional perspective. This is why a lot of people those types of people like to attack Mike, right? They just want to, they come up with all kinds of nonsense to attack Mike. But it doesn't matter because, like I said, I don't focus on them because there are people that count. There are people that know. And these are the people that can validate the work that you've put out. And that's how you know that you got it right. You know? So in any case, yeah, that's what got me kicked off with the April 2020 presentation was deconstructing Rubber Soul. And there were a lot of holes. Like in other words, let me just do this. Yeah. So as an example, this is in the new presentation, folks, in the addendum. So we're told that in the month of October, the Beatles banged out 8 songs, which they recorded in 18 days, in a total of 28 takes, which was an average of 3.5 takes per song. Now, for those of you who are musicians and songwriters and have recorded, I just read those numbers off to you, and you probably just took a step back and you said, well, that's a red flag. 8 songs and only 28 takes. And then in November, 8 songs were recorded in 13 days in a total of 14 takes.
What? Oh my God.
For an average of 1.8 takes per song.
Well, they are the Fab Four, you know, just the Fab Four, they can do that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing, right? So they will say, well, it's the Beatles. The Beatles can do that. The Beatles, you know, they can do magical things. And people have to understand that the Beatles were just 4 guys. I'm not knocking them. They were just 4 guys. They weren't superhuman. They weren't magical. None of that stuff. They were 4 guys. Here's some additional information, right? So if you want to see this whole thing, folks, watch the presentation, the addendum. So they arrive in the studio on October 11th of 1965. One day in, they knock out Run for Your Life in 5 takes. On the second day in the studio, Drive My Car is completely done in 4 takes. On the 5th day that they're in the studio, Day Trip is done in 3 takes. And Drive My Car in 4 takes. Hopefully that's what I said. And 7 days in, If I Needed Someone, and they did that in 1 take.
Oh my God.
Okay. So what we see, the problem with this is that in order for this to work, they have to be working on multiple songs at the same time. It also says that whatever song they started, there were no false starts.
Right.
The song was started and the song was completed. And as they're writing the song, they had to get to rehearsing the song and arranging the song like immediately. And then to nail the songs down. When you're coming in with no backlog of music and you're writing from scratch on the spot, and to knock songs out in no more than 5 takes on any of the songs is not believable. It's not realistic. It's not real world stuff. And in the presentation, I showed a slide going to the White Album in 1968. And I listed a bunch of the songs from the White Album showing that 28 takes, 50 takes, 70 takes, 100 takes to get the songs done. So to think that they were able to bang Rubber Soul out, 16 songs in a total of only 42 takes for all songs in 30 days.
That's incredible.
It's not believable. It's absolutely not believable. And so that's just some of the information I have in the presentation. It was that type of analysis when I broke it down that I said, okay, this is, there's something going on here. So that led to, all right, so they were in the studio and they were doing something. What were they doing? Well, they were singing. So their task for the 30 days was not to write songs and rehearse songs or, and record the actual instrumental tracks. Their job was to come in to learn the songs that were already written and recorded. Because what George Martin did was he had outside songwriters, ghostwriters. They wrote the songs. And while the Beatles were doing their European tour and they were doing their American tour and they were doing this and that and on the film set of Help and recording the Help album in 1965, they had songwriters on the EMI/Tavistock staff. And I think there were probably maybe no more than a half a dozen during that 62 through 66 period. They were heads down writing the songs. And I believe George Martin could very well have been one of those songwriters. In fact, I have a clip where he says that the lead guitar part in Michelle is his composition. And Michelle is one of the songs on Rubber Soul. Theodore Adorno, in all likelihood, had a hand in composing some of these songs. And then there were others. So while the Beatles were doing all this other stuff, films and recording the vocals for Help and doing their European tour and their American tour, the songs were getting written. And then George Martin had the songs recorded.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, he had them recorded. And so by the time the Beatles got into the studio, the songs were written, recorded. The names of the songs were already known. The sequencing for the songs was already known.
Because this is all the Beatles, same time. For 30 days, can't write the songs, make the songs, and then start doing the album work and the track listing. Again, in the addendum, you did show how they make vinyls and the process that takes and the length of time. So that had to be done either at the same time or well before in advance.
Yes. Yeah. So what happens is the process is the songs have to be sequenced. So when the producer does the sequencing, what you're doing is you're listing the songs in the play order that they're going to appear on the record, A side, B side. And a lot of what gets determined in which songs show up in which order on side A or side B is the run times of the songs. Because you don't want to have a lopsided album, right? Side B has a tremendous amount of dead wax at the end. So you want to balance it out. And until you do the sequencing, you cannot print the record labels, the center labels that go on the vinyl. Yeah. And you also cannot print the album jackets because on the back of the Rubber Soul jacket is the list of the songs in sequenced order. The official story tells us that they cut the lacquer on the 17th, the final lacquer, which is the beginning of the pressing process. But the day before, we're told that's when George Martin finished the sequencing. So if you finish the sequencing on the 16th, there is no way to press the records after the lacquer is cut. And they had to press the records immediately after the final lacquer was cut in order to get the initial batch of records out to the stores on December 3rd. Because the way the process works, folks, is, and this is in my presentation, I intentionally included a clip on how vinyl records are pressed. The label is pressed with the record. So at the time when the record is being pressed, the label is placed in the center and it's pressed, which means you have to have the final labels in-house.
That's right, yeah.
And ready for when the albums are going to be pressed. It cannot be afterwards. Yeah. It's not like they have adhesive on the back and then somebody's going to sit there and place labels on thousands and thousands of albums, right? It's all mechanized.
Yep.
So the labels have to be in-house. At the very least, at the time when the final lacquer is cut, because as soon as that lacquer is cut, especially in the case of Rubber Soul, they had to have the album signed, sealed, delivered in retail outlets on December 3rd, which was only 2.5 weeks from November 17th when the lacquer was cut. So what does that mean? That means that the labels and the record sleeves with the names of the songs had to have already been in place prior to or at about the time when the Beatles arrived in the studio. In other words, they had to be done, ready, printed. And so when you do labels and when you're doing album covers, they have to be proofed as well. You know, it's not like today where you have digital technology and you can run something and do it real quick. Back in the day, the album covers, and it's still done today, it's 4-color printing. It took 1 week alone for the ink to dry on whatever was being printed. You see? So the point being is, going back to make this kind of simplify this, okay? All of that stuff, the record sleeves with the names of the songs on the back of the album cover sequenced, the record labels, the center labels for the vinyl, they were already done.
Yep.
The songs were known, the run times were known, it was sequenced. And so when the Beatles came into the studio, what they were doing was they had to learn the melodies of the songs. They had to learn the vocals. And the way they did that was the instrumental tracks that were already recorded for the songs, that's what they rehearsed to.
Yeah. Well, they may have had a guideline on them as well, even.
Yeah. Yep. And so, and then when the songs were completed, when they decided that the final vocals were done, and by the way, when they were finalizing the vocals, they were doing a process called comping, comparing tracks, which meant that they would do multiple takes on songs, and there was editing that took place to take the best parts of the individual takes and make it and create a master final vocal track.
Yeah.
That's why the tapes were running all the time during Rubber Soul, because what Norman Smith, who was the engineer, and George Martin were doing was they were under the gun and they captured everything. So then George Martin and Norman Smith, what they did was they stitched things together. They edited to be able to create that final vocal track. So that's what they did, right? So when they came into the studio, the way John Lennon was able to get Run for Your Life done in one day, in the next day, in 5 takes, was because he was played the song. Here's the instrumental track to this song, John. It's called Run for Your Life. You're going to be credited as the primary songwriter. Let's do it. So John had to rehearse the song, and then they did 5 takes. And on the 5th take, they deemed it was a go. But the 5th take could have included bits and pieces from the first 4 takes as well, because there's, like I said, there's a process of comping. There's an editing process that takes place in order to get a final vocal track. That's how it worked. So when Drive My Car was completed on the 2nd day, it was because the instrumental track was already there. They had to learn the vocal melodies, and and they rehearsed it. They had to rehearse the song, and then when they felt comfortable that they had the song down, the melody down, they started recording and doing takes. And then Norman Smith and George Martin would take those takes and edit them, and because they were comped, put them together, and then you had a final vocal track. And then what would happen is George Martin and Norman Smith would mix the songs down. So because they already had the instrumental tracks were already finalized, they were already recorded, so they had to finalize the vocals. And once they had the final vocals, that's when they sat down and they started mixing the instrumentals with the vocals to get the final mix of the song. That's what they were doing with Rubber Soul. And like you mentioned before, Billy, I am convinced that's how it worked for all of their first 7 albums, starting with Please Please Me.
Well, basically, there is that clip we'll probably get to, but it's the BBC interview where John Lennon says, the best days of the Beatles were in Hamburg when they were a band then, and then because we're kind of capable people, we became efficient recording artists.
Right.
Which to me was kind of slang for saying, they could go into the studio and do what they were told. And the real Beatles were in Hamburg when they were just an average, even if that, band, because, guys there wouldn't want them to go back because they were calling them lousy and stuff. So they've just been, a band with musical interests. Yeah, who knows? Again, this may be a different topic, but have they been groomed right from the start, or have they just been kind of encouraged without them actually knowing what they were part of? There is that Faustian deal that it comes to at some point. But yeah, they've just been taken and says, we're going to make you famous. You're going to play along. You're going to play along. He's got to do this Faustian deal, whatever, right? Let's do that. It seems like a giggle. And next thing you know, they're just having to keep state secrets, but they're trying to talk about the truth, but they can't because obviously they're gagged to a certain extent.
Yeah, the Lennon interview is very telling. He said they had become technically efficient recording artists. And then at the very end, he says, if you give me a tuba, I can make something out of it. Right? So, yeah, there's some very important clips in the addendum. And one of them is aside from the Lennon clips, we'll talk about each one of them. But probably the most important one is the August 5th, 1966 BBC interview, where the BBC interviewed John Lennon and Paul McCartney at Paul McCartney's house. And August 5th was the same day that Revolver was released. And the interview was actually released on August 29th, which was the last concert gig that the Beatles did at Candlestick Park. So the 5th of August and the 29th of August, and both of those dates are pivotal moments in Beatle history. Right, the final release of Revolver, and then their very last concert performance at Candlestick Park on August 29th. But in that clip, my voice cracked. In that interview, it's about 25 minutes long, but there's 6 minutes of it that I put in my presentation, because it was the 6 minutes where John and Paul were talking specifically about their songwriting. And one of the things, and I'll read it off here, okay? One of the things that Paul says, and Paul drops some bombshells.
Yeah, it's very interview.
Yeah. John was in a supporting role, but I mean, Paul dropped bombshells. And he said that the only time they need to, quote, force themselves to write songs is when an album or film comes up. So that was very interesting, the way Paul McCartney phrased that. He's got to force himself. They've got to force themselves to write songs. The official narrative says that these guys are the most prolific genius pop songwriters of all time.
Hi.
So you would think that with those types of skills, those types of abilities, that would be your bread and butter thing to do, write songs. Not force yourself to do it when a deadline comes up. That's basically what he's saying. An event is coming up. It's an album, and now we have to force ourselves to write music.
Some of the ways we talked about that is just like, sometimes it takes us 2 months. It's very hard to start with to get the first one and stuff. But again, it takes them 2 months, and then they're going to go in the studio and do it in the first day.
Right. So Paul had mentioned that, and John too, that to write songs, it's a process. And it's iterative, and it takes time. And he said that for Revolver, he said the first 2 songs, it took weeks trying to get just one written. And then here's the other bombshell, Billy, because a lot of people that are the rabid believers in the story, they're in the church of the Beatles, go about saying that the Beatles were writing every waking moment of their life. So they were writing while they were on tour. They were writing in hotels. They were writing in limos. They were writing in restaurants. They were writing when they were on film sets. They were writing when, they were on the crapper.
Yeah, on a holiday.
Writing all the time. They were writing 24/7, 365 days a year. That's the rationale. That's the explanation that's put out there. And then Paul says in the interview, August 5th, 1966 with the BBC, we don't write between LPs normally. Maybe 1 or 2. Then we write a great big batch. And then right after he says that, the BBC interviewer questions the feasibility of writing 12 songs for an album or in batches. And then John follows the BBC interviewer's comment by saying, it is some days. He says, in fact, writing songs for Revolver was very impossible. And then Paul drops 2 more bombs, folks, in this interview. He says, the interviewer is talking to him about yesterday and all this, the song Yesterday. And then Paul says, we're limited as a group. We're the first to say we're not all that good musically. This is one of the most famous songwriters of all time making this statement after they released their 7th album.
Yeah.
And what many people consider it to run head to head with Sgt. Pepper. Revolver is a great album. It's one of my personal favorites.
Yep.
How is it that you could put out that type of material and then step back and say that we're limited as a group and we're not that good musically? It doesn't make any sense. If you're saying that after you released Revolver, what were your musical and songwriting skills like going back to Please Please Me and all the other albums? I mean, we could argue that you can only get better over time.
Which they weren't doing at that time, seemingly.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly, it is. It's a bombshell.
Yeah.
Because for all of the folks out there that want to argue that they were always writing songs all the time, Paul is telling you, no, actually, we didn't. We didn't write in between albums. And by the way, we're limited as a group and we're not that good musically.
Considering I've just released yesterday and these songs are definitive classics of our time.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Right. And then he admits at the very end that he didn't play on Yesterday. Did you hear that part of it?
What did I?
He said he didn't have to show for Yesterday, yet the official narrative credits him for playing acoustic guitar on the song Yesterday. But Paul in the interview is saying, I wasn't there. I didn't have to show for the song.
And George Martin said that as well. They got somebody in for Yesterday. Or they had other musicians on or something.
Yeah, George Martin had said that he was masterfully speaking. I have a clip in the presentation, the addendum, where he says that Yesterday was the first time they brought in outside musicians, which is not true.
Yeah.
But we can easily point back to Andy White,
yeah,
who drummed on P.S. I Love You and Love Me Do, right? And then he said that that's how it would be going forward. I'm paraphrasing. But that's essentially what John was saying.
We're not scared to use people. Yeah, we're not scared to use people if we need them.
We're not averse to using outside musicians.
Yeah.
Now, what George didn't say was that we were always using outside musicians. They were always in the mix.
Yeah.
So this is how it works. You have to, it's the truth hidden in plain sight. You just have to have the awareness to hone in on when they're telling you things that are truthful. See, what happens with most people, Billy, is they get caught up in the overall veneer of the story, right? They get captured by the fantastical aspects of the story. Oh my God, they did 16 songs in 30 days. Oh, they're just so brilliant. Only the Beatles can do this. It's just absolutely amazing, And it's the same thing that happened with Let It Be. That's an example I used in the presentation as well, right? So Let It Be is another example of where they weren't able to do what they said that they were going to do. They said they were going to come into the Let It Be sessions, which was going to span, again, 30 days, the month of January 1969, and they were going to knock out 14 original compositions. And they were going to then do 2 concerts, and those 2 concerts were going to make their way into a TV special. What did we get with Let It Be? We got nothing with Let It Be. We didn't get 14 songs. After 30 days, they ended up playing 5 songs on the rooftop to an audience of no one, releasing a very depressing, grainy movie. And I have a quote from John Lennon where, the album Let It Be, which by Beatles standards is considered to be one of probably their weakest album by many people. John Lennon saying that he handed the tapes off to Phil Spector, and we handed off the tapes were a bunch of shit, pile of shit.
Yeah.
And he did something with them, and he did a great job. So this is Lennon explaining his version of what the Get Back sessions were all about. But people, when they watch Peter Jackson's movie, they're taken in by the backslapping and the laughing and just seeing the Beatles in the studio, because people are just, it's the idol worship.
Aye.
It's the whole thing is romanticized, and that's what they fall in love with. They're not paying attention to the details. They're not paying attention to the fact that nothing got done when we laid up against the objectives of what was supposed to get done with the Let It Be sessions. And a lot of people don't know, or a lot of fans don't understand, is additional work was done on the songs after January of 1969, going into the early part of 1970. So the Get Back sessions wasn't just a 30-day stint. And you have to ask yourself, if they weren't able to do it as a captive audience for the Get Back sessions, in other words, there were no MBEs they had to step out for like they did with Revolver. There was no 2 days out of the studio to do a TV special like they did for Revolver. There was none of that stuff. There was no 1 day taken out to finish up a fan club flexi disc like they did with Revolver. For Get Back, they were a captive audience, and it didn't get done. And that's even with Billy Shears, aka Paul McCartney, there, who was a professional studio musician and songwriter. And that's why Billy, I think you and I might have talked about this. It's why they brought in Billy Preston.
I don't think we have, but yeah, I'm aware of that. He definitely helped that album. I was just thinking, because obviously up until Revolver, it seems like George Martin's had these songs ready, Beatles come in, and then this replacement of Paul's happened. Billy Shears has come in. George Harrison hasn't turned up to the studio. He's essentially created Sgt. Pepper. And then we get the White Album with all these different, probably songwriters, and Billy's probably wrote a couple in there as well. And that's a sprawling thing. I think George Martin would rather reduce that to one concise, good album.
Right.
That.
That's what George Martin wanted to do. He wanted the White Album to be a single LP.
This is what I'm saying. Seems to be like George Martin's control after Revolver. Billy's came in and he stepped back a bit, whether an advisory or something like that. Maybe he helped in the recording techniques, Sgt. Pepper and stuff, but is it Billy's arrogance that then said, we can get TV cameras in here and we're going to do an album in 30 days? Because without having those tracks there ready to go, why would they go and put that pressure on themselves if they're not confident at doing it? It seems pretty crazy.
Yeah, so I think what happened with Let It Be, the Get Back sessions, the reason why they brought a camera crew in, this is a hypothesis that I have, is because Billy knew that there was no authentic, genuine footage of the Beatles songwriting, practicing their craft, of writing original compositions, of laying down the recorded tracks that you hear on the records. It doesn't exist. In fact, that was the major tagline for Peter Jackson's Get Back. It's the only footage really of the Beatles working in the studio.
Right.
So I think what happened was, going back to 1969, Billy knew that was a hole in the story.
Yeah.
The Beatles had a camera following them around for everything that they did. It documented everything that they did, except in the studio.
When they were writing their magic songs.
Right? One person who thought they were very clever, but, not very clever, said to me, well, do you have footage of you writing music or, of writing songs? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I do, but that's beside the point. I'm not the Beatles.
It's a big difference.
Okay. We're talking about what is considered by many people to be the greatest rock band of all time, with the 2 greatest, most prolific, genius pop music songwriters of all time. And we've got 0 genuine, authentic footage of them practicing their craft, of writing original music and laying down the recorded tracks for the albums. 0. Okay, so I think Billy knew that was a problem, and so I think that was
some songs in the back of his head ready to come in with, so he could just pretend he was making it up on the spot. It's just actually going there bare
with Let It Be.
Yeah.
I don't think that. I think some of those songs came in with at least demo versions of them. Get Back, for one.
Right.
I've Got a Feeling.
So they're not just running empty, and you think I've had these songs and then they've tried to make a good album out of it and just kind of done what they could in the full
Yeah.
up.
And think about Get Back as an example, right? I mean, there's 12 songs on the final album, and two of them weren't even written during, you know, the Get Back sessions or even afterward. We had Across the Universe, which was written in 1968, and then we've got One After 909, which the official narrative claims goes back to 1960.
Right.
That's kind of interesting, right? The official narrative says that One After 909 and I'll Follow the Sun were actually written back in 1960. Yet none of those songs, like One After 909 doesn't show up until the Let It Be album. And I would argue that, although not my most favorite song, it was certainly better than some of the other original compositions on the early albums. Yeah. Why did it make it on Please Please Me? Why wasn't it on with the Beatles? Why wasn't it on Beatles for Sale? I don't know. And, you know, and I'll Follow the Sun, which is a great song. I really like I'll Follow the Sun. That doesn't make it until 4 years later on Beatles for Sale. So it's just something really, really sketchy about the narratives around the songs, around the entire story of the Beatles. Now, going back to something you said before, Billy, in an interview, it was in the 90s with Bernie Goldberg, said that George Harrison was a no-show for the Sgt. Pepper sessions.
Okay.
Right? I have that clip in the addendum. Well, if George was essentially a no-show for the sessions, because Billy said he was putting a pool in or something at his...
Oh, yeah, George Harrison, you mean?
George Harrison.
Yeah, George Harrison, yeah.
Yeah, George Harrison. So if George Harrison was a no-show for the Sgt. Pepper sessions, then who played guitar for the songs that he was credited for playing on?
Yeah.
You see, it's stuff like that comes up.
Because Within and Without You, he was supposed to have wrote that one as well. He was getting into his sitar and all that.
Yeah, and he supposedly played acoustic guitar on it, although no matter how closely I listen to that song, I can't hear an acoustic guitar on it. And you know, it's highly unlikely that George wrote Within You, Without You, especially if Billy's telling us that he was home putting a pool in.
And there's lots of stories of during Sgt. Pepper, I think, of Billy going back in the studio at night and re-recording certain things. So it's essentially a Paul McCartney, well, Billy Shear's solo album, and he's introducing himself to the band, and you know, the whole concept of it is, you know, they're just taking, this is a time where it's time to shift society and take them down the LSD path and whatever. That's Billy's role, I guess. Maybe the other one didn't want to, you know, if he had would he have taken part in that? Who knows? He's just probably, because he was talking about, you know, Paul McCartney was going to die and stuff like that, was having premonition dreams and stuff. So, yeah, whether he'd have endorsed the LSD thing or that was just the deal that was going to happen. And Billy, in the background, he was contributing as well, do you think, to the Beatles' music writing, you know, without getting credit for it? You know, the song.
Yeah, I think it's very possible. There's no way to know for sure, but the one of the stories that lends credence to the possibility that he was writing before he appeared officially as part of the band was the song In My Life. So going back a couple of years ago, he said that he wrote the music to In My Life and John wrote the lyrics. And when he said that, the mainstream media went into damage control, and they had two, quote, computer models run, right? So this is the thing. This is how they get people sucked into, like, oh, a computer's so much smarter than us, you know? So I guess if the computer said that John wrote the song, then, you know, John wrote the song. This people get sucked into this all the time. When in fact, why wouldn't we believe him when he says that he wrote the music to In My Life, right? The mainstream narrative after running the computer model says that he, quote, misremembered. Now, you don't misremember writing a song like In My Life, which is considered one of the greatest rock pop songs of all time. You just don't forget. If I wrote In My Life, I would not misremember my part in writing the song, you know? So that to me tells me that he was possibly one of the ghostwriters, professional songwriters that was in the background turning out songs for them. It's possible.
Yeah, and just again talking about people think the Beatles played on the own tracks. Andy White was officially credited, but we've got the drummer, Purdy.
Bernard Purdy.
He's basically saying four drummers on Beatles records, and Ringo's not one of them.
Yeah.
And he's quite an important character as to the whole thing. He said was 98% of records in the 60s and 70s, the original so-called artists, they didn't actually play in them.
Right.
So to me, that just makes you think this is a factory, it's an industry. You maybe got these groups that have got rough jams of their songs. One that sticks out, I heard Frankie Goes to Hollywood play in a bar on YouTube, and they've got this version of Two Tribes. And then you get Trevor Horn, I think was the producer, and his version is just night and day. You can tell it's the same song, but what that producer done with it was like unbelievable. It wouldn't have been a hit with their version. So to me, it's like a lot of these bands have got their stuff and then goes to professionals and they fix them or whatever.
Yes.
And then it becomes a sheen polished thing that the public are going to want to consume. And then the band's job is to go around and play that. And, maybe if the song's been changed, then they have to play the changes that's been done to the song. Or maybe even it's getting played in the background a lot. Who knows? I think there's a lot of good bands that still play their music, but maybe at certain levels you get to they rely more on the backing tracks. And I think I sent you something recently about somebody talking about Keith Richards and Ronnie Wood, like having arthritis and they don't blame them if they've got backing guys and stuff like that,
Yeah. So, going back to Bernard Purdy is a legendary drummer, session drummer, played on Steely Dan records, many records, many. Just look him up. Played 25 years with Aretha Franklin. And he was paid by Brian Epstein to fix and play on 21 Beatle tracks. And Bernard's referring to the 62 through 66 period. And, I know people, I hear the peanut gallery out there. Oh, he's a liar. Bernard's a liar. Bernard's a liar. At what point do you wake up and stop hugging the dogma, okay, and realize that the man is telling you exactly what happened?
He says he had threats on his life for telling the story.
Exactly. So I have some people say, well, how come other people who wrote songs and session musicians haven't come out, Mike? Wouldn't they come out? This is what people they just not there intellectually, because they don't understand how the world really works.
Well, I thought a very key point of that is where he mentioned that Beatles records in America came out on Capitol and another record company, probably because they were getting fixed by those companies.
Yes.
So he had some rights to them.
Yeah, and Bernard didn't just drum on 21 Beatle tracks, but he also fixed the tracks on the Tony Sheridan, some of the Tony Sheridan songs that the Beatles allegedly played on. But just to go back to where people are saying, well, how come other people don't step out? This doesn't make sense. Look, this is a deep state psychological operation. The Beatles were a major psyop, and it is still a psyop today. First of all, the folks that played on the records, the session players, were very well compensated. You don't believe me? Watch the Wrecking Crew and let them tell you how good the compensation was back in the day, the 1960s and 1970s, when they were doing all of those records. In fact, the tagline for the Wrecking Crew DVD is, there was one band behind them all.
Right.
Okay? As far as the songwriters go, hey, the songwriters are part of the deep state machinery. It's part of Tavistock. It's part of EMI. And their job was to write these songs, whether it be Theodore Adorno, whether it be George Martin, or whether it be 5 or 6 other professional songwriters. That was their job. And they got paid handsomely for it. Don't think for one second that they were not compensated. This is not like some guy sitting in his basement and he writes a song that he thinks is good and he hands it off to George Martin and the Beatles make it great and he's left holding the bag. In other words, he doesn't get rewarded or paid for or compensated for writing the song. It doesn't work like that. It's a machine.
Well, they need the best songwriters, so
Exactly.
you're going to have to pay the best to do the best, and then they're making far more money than the guys couldn't even make that money himself. So he's happy with his compensation, and then they're happy programming the world with whatever they decide.
Another narrative that's out there, Billy, that's not very believable is that John Lennon plays, we're told, the guitar on Dear Prudence. It's him doing the chord picking on the song, right? And the story goes that he was taught that by Donovan while he was in India.
Aye.
Okay, I can tell you right now, that's not John Lennon playing on Julia. Do you know who it is?
Donovan.
It's Donovan. Exactly. It's Donovan. I'm convinced it's Donovan you hear on Dear Prudence. It's Donovan you hear on the song Julia. And it's Donovan that you hear on Happiness is a Warm Gun. Those three songs, okay? Listen to some of Donovan's music. Listen to how he picks his chords. And you're going to hear the same style of playing. Because in the presentation, the addendum, what did John tell us about his guitar playing, Billy? He said that when you get right down to it, he's embarrassed by it.
Yeah. He says he can make up a racket, basically playing rhythm guitar in Hamburg, driving a band.
Playing rock chords, playing bar chords and stuff like that. Yeah. So here we have John telling us in plain English that his guitar skills are not that great. In fact, he said that they were primitive, right?
Yeah. Next to B.B. King, he'd be embarrassed.
Right. So how do you go from saying that to then getting credited for the types of guitar playing style and techniques that we hear on songs like Julia, Dear Prudence, and so on?
Donovan was in India as well for a few months, so he's got to know them.
Donovan was very close to the Beatles, very tied into them. So
he admitted something recently as well in some interview on YouTube. He's alluded to that. Maybe it was one of your shows. I've seen it. Can't remember exactly, but yeah, he knows. Again, he's done a bit of masterful speaking on the subject that makes me think he was involved.
Yeah, there's a friend of mine who sent me a post from somebody that had posted something on one of these Paul is Dead Facebook pages. And this person said that they went to a Donovan concert and they had VIP.
Maybe this is a story.
So they were able to. It was a meet and greet, and this person had the opportunity to speak to Donovan. He said Donovan, he's on in age now, and he had a cane and stuff like that, and he put on a great show. And he asked Donovan, how is it that the Beatles were able to write all of these fantastic songs? I mean, at the rate and pace that they did. And the guy who put this post up said that Donovan responded by saying that there was a genius songwriter, that while the Beatles were out gallivanting around, and I believe, if I recall, that's a direct quote from the post, these songs were getting written by this genius songwriter. Then he asked Donovan who the genius songwriter was, and Donovan said, "I've said enough. I shouldn't say anymore."
Right.
Okay. Now, who was that genius songwriter? Many will guess that it's Theodore Adorno, and it could be. But I have argued that based upon everything else that Adorno was doing with the Frankfurt School and writing his books and his lecturing and all that stuff, that the premise that he wrote all of the Beatles music, I have a hard time buying into that one. Do I believe that Theodore Adorno did write a number of Beatles songs? That's very possible, along with George Martin, by the way. And like I said, with a cadre of maybe another half dozen songwriters. It's interesting. A good friend of mine wrote me and said that when he goes back and he listens to the Beatles music from 1962 to 66, he hears two different songwriters with regard to the songwriter that was writing John Lennon songs,
Okay.
and the songwriter that was writing Paul McCartney songs.
Right.
Okay, so that was an interesting. This person's very accomplished. Okay, so they would know how to pick this out and hear this. But he hears, in other words, he hears two distinct different styles. So that would say that there was a songwriter or maybe a couple of songwriters that had a certain style where they were writing songs for Lennon, and then those songs were credited to John Lennon.
Yeah, it
And
makes
then
them
there
more
was
believable as
a
well,
lead
doesn't it?
song, yeah, or a lead songwriter with other songwriters that were writing a certain style for Paul McCartney. Those songs are credited to Paul McCartney. But also in the addendum, I replayed that clip with George Martin and Howard Goodall. And
This one.
Howard Goodall Howard Goodall is an accomplished composer. And Howard was asking him about the complexity of some of these songs. Like, how would four working class guys who are really a bar and club band to start with, how are they able to put song structures together like Yesterday, Blackbird, For No One? And so Howard, to his credit, and look up Howard Goodall, folks, okay? He's an accomplished composer himself. He's no slouch. And when he asked George this, and this interview was in a documentary called Produced by George Martin. As soon as Howard goes down that path, George does this.
Huh.
It's the Masonic sign for tell
That
no
makes,
secrets.
that makes me think, do Masons assume other people in these positions are other Masons? Does he know he's a Mason, or is he just hoping he's a Mason,
I don't see how Howard could not be a Mason. I mean, to be honest with you, considering what he's accomplished, but who knows, because what was interesting in that clip was that even though George did this,
he kept on talking, he
kept going.
Except so the chords say this is a cadence, this is very unusual. And George is like, oh, the boys did that,
These Anglican structures in the songs that he was talking about, and he was actually playing them for George Martin on the piano. And I didn't have the original clip in there because of copyrights, so I had to do stills, and I had to kind of phase the stills in to show what was going on. But in the original clip, when Howard Goodall first asks George Martin about the song structures, George Martin stiffened up.
Yeah.
He went like this. And the body language was, I can't believe you're asking me that.
There's a camera over there, mate.
So George, he got really stiff. He backed up a little bit in his chair, and you could tell he was taken back by the question. And the reason why I think it was so concerning to George Martin was because he knows he's dealing with another composer, not some off the street schlep. This is a guy that knows exactly what's going on behind the scenes and the styles in which these songs are being sourced from.
Yeah.
So it's very, very telling. And then we have Ringo Starr talking about the songwriters.
Oh, just the writers, but obviously referring to the songwriters.
The writers, right. I mean, and he didn't say it in just one interview.
Yeah.
Ringo said it in two separate interviews where he talked about the writers, and he did not associate the writers with John Lennon or Paul McCartney. He didn't make the connection.
No.
He let the audience speculate and make the connection because people would think, oh, well, who else would he be talking about? He never says Paul McCartney and John Lennon were the songwriters. He said they were mainly the singers.
I mean, it's obvious. Well, that's another giveaway, but it's obvious if you don't say John and Paul changed their writing style. That's what you would say. You wouldn't refer to guys in the group as the writers.
Right.
You would say John and Paul, they changed their style there, and we got a bit more Sgt. Pepper and whatever.
Of course. Of course. You would have said John and Paul were great songwriters. They changed up and they brought a different feel to the music. All this stuff. I mean, it would have been John and Paul. You don't say the writers.
Again, they're giving away in plain sight. And it's almost, again, like that, the thing when they've got to reveal themselves, tell you the truth.
Yeah.
But then if you can't see it, then it's your problem. So they're kind of involved in the conspiracy as well, obviously.
Yeah. And we have George saying that he and Ringo never practiced.
Hi. They were just could turn up, and then when they need an album made, Ringo would know what to play at the right fill, and George could come in and do what he needs to do, and that's it. It's the only time he needs to pick up a guitar.
George said that there are times when years went by where he didn't pick up the guitar. and he would just show up in the studio when he had to make, like you said, make an album. Well, you and I both know, Billy, that's impossible. I mean, you do not play the guitar for 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever it may be, and then show up in the studio and rely on muscle memory to get you back into the flow of things. I mean, that's ridiculous. See, that's the thing. A lot of folks don't understand. I mean, the music business is a business.
Yep. Well, to me, it's like he knows, because he says he could be a guitar player if he practiced.
Right.
To me, it's almost like, what's the point in practicing? It's all done by this musicians, and I'm George Harrison, and I'm not going to be as good as the guys who are going to play my record anyway, kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, like, what's the point of me practicing? It's all a facade almost. Because if you wanted to get good, surely if you could be good at guitar, well, put the effort in. You can go do gigs with hundreds of people.
Right.
But it's just like, what's the point? I'm bought and sold kind of thing, and I just turn up and the album gets made, and that's what I got from that.
Yeah, I mean, I put a lot of stuff in the addendum. A couple of the clips I played multiple times.
Yeah, I noticed that. Something done before, but it's like, it does drive the message home. Yeah,
you have to drive the message home. That's why I did it, because what happens is people will watch it once, and like, that's kind of interesting, and then if you don't go back to it, they just kind of forget about it. So I would wait until another moment where that clip was important to what I was talking about, and I would play it again.
Yeah,
it's like the clip where we're told that between the two of them, between 1956 and 1962, between John Lennon and Paul McCartney, they wrote 100 songs. Yet they meet George Martin in 1962. It's like they had nothing behind them. The best thing they had was Love Me Do. And that's even if they actually wrote Love Me Do.
Well, I doubt that, but basically that was their starter for Tenses. That's not the big hit we wanted. I guess, would it been too much to come up with a big hit straight away? I guess to build them up a wee bit, And so Love Me Do was a nice wee one, nothing extraordinary, but it was a good little tune, enough to get them a wee bit notoriety and then building that,
Well, Love Me Do?
Yeah.
Yeah, Love Me Do, but George Martin said that Love Me Do was not the hit that he was looking for. So what George Martin was saying is, okay, it's a song, but that song's not going to number one. That song's not going to chart. That's what George Martin was saying. So we've got to find music for you. Like it's the Mersey Beat article from 1962 that said that they were flying to London to record songs that were written for them.
Yeah, by George Martin.
Given to them by their recording manager, their producer, George Martin. There's just so much stuff out there. And, folks, it just, you have to let go of the baggage. You have to let go of the dogma. You have to realize that our entire reality is filled with official narratives, lies, and deception.
Yeah.
All of it. And we could talk about, what took place back in September 11. I got to speak in code here because I want to try to put this on YouTube. Talk about the Kennedy assassination. We could talk about the moon landings. We could talk about everything. We can go back to March of 2020. They pulled that off. How many people to this day still believe that what they took everybody through starting in March of 2020 was real?
Well, put it this way, I've just lost another job for trying to educate people with that, and them going through the roof because I'm the devil.
Yeah, but that's the thing, Billy. You and I talked about that before we got started. We live in a reality that consists of a lot of people who simply cannot critically think.
We can't talk. This is the thing. You can't even enter a discussion with them because emotion just comes up to there, and then it fries their brain, and then they've lost it.
It's all based on emotions. And if you read the book by Daniel Esterlin on Tavistock, this is a key component of Tavistock's strategy to get you into an emotional state. Because when you're in an emotional state, you're irrational. You drop down to your reptilian brain type of functioning, flight or fight. You become very angry. You lash out, you attack. Also, along with that is a process where Tavistock, the book, they figured this out. People resort back to an infantile type of way of thinking, a mindset. That they're no longer adults who can rationally think and reason. They fall back into a helpless state. And they actually use the term an infantile way of being, way of thinking and behaving.
If you look at the big thing that happened, March 2020, then just, or what happened after it, do this, walk here, go here, red light, green light,
Right. Right. It was all dictating to you what was acceptable and what was not. It was like you're back in second grade. It's like you're back in grade school.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about in the very beginning about trauma-based mind control. This is all part of trauma-based mind control at an unbelievable level, an incredible level.
Yep.
And, the record industry, the music industry, entertainment, as we said before, is huge. It's a gigantic lever for them to manipulate people and make them believe certain things and to go along with certain things that under normal circumstances, people just, they would not. But then people are not rationally thinking anymore. Everything is based upon emotion. It's go along to get along.
Yep.
Nobody is standing in their own authority. They've given up because they've given up their authority, they've lost their empowerment. They've disempowered themselves.
Well, I'm just one person. What can I do? Attitude as well. Nobody realizes the power that people do have if they put their mind to something. I was going to ask you, have you ever seen a movie called Josie and the Pussycats?
The movie? No, I never watched the movie.
Aye, there was based on a cartoon strip.
Yeah, I remember the cartoon. Yeah.
Well, you might enjoy the movie. It goes into all this in quite a fun way. And,
does it?
Oh, aye, big time. It just shows you blue is the new pink. They've got to play the record in the store, and literally girls in the store, we need to buy this, because that's
right.
And they've got this control center underground, and that's where they put all the subliminal messages on the CDs and stuff like that, and just shows you how they control this band from nothing, and they think they're famous, and then they realize, it's been made to happen for them, and it's a fun movie. Yeah, I'll check it out and send it to you.
Yeah, I will check it out. And the thing too, Billy, is people have to. They really have to give up the idolizing and the worship, as we said earlier in the show. Whether you realize it or not, when you worship a band, an artist, an entertainer, a celebrity, they are in a role of like a lesser god. And as I mentioned before, what they're doing is they're usurping your consciousness. That's your non-physical energy. They're usurping your thoughts because you're so focused on that. And they're also usurping your physical energy because you're actually spending money on their merchandise, their CDs, their concerts and T-shirts and all of that stuff.
I mean, it's okay to be a fan and appreciate somebody's work and buy their stuff and whatever, but when you become obsessed with it and it takes over your life and you worship it and you put them on a pedestal and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people that they just absorb every word that these celebrities, these entertainers, and these artists say, as if there's some kind of seer, there's some kind of unbelievable ultimate wisdom that that they're espousing, and it's nonsense. You have to understand that these people were placed there. They're props in the theater of the absurd.
Yeah.
And as long as you continue to latch onto them and you follow them to such a degree that you're actually taking away from your own life.
Yeah.
Seriously, if you want to invest in someone, invest in yourself. Invest, do your own creative things.
Yeah. I mean, I know people who are like adults, it's like 30, 40 years old and they're still getting boy band posters on their wall and stuff like that. It's like,
it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Look, like I said, I was a Beatle freak. I had all kinds of Beatle stuff, posters and stuff. You can still see some of the stuff. I got, Abbey Road up here, and I moved a lot of stuff. But I have a lot of memorabilia and merchandise over the years because I started this when I was 8 years old. I'm 64 now.
Right.
But over the last 7 years, no, Billy, I stopped. I just can't participate in this reality anymore. There's a certain level of interaction you have to have because we're operating within their construct. They created this reality. They created the companies that we have to deal with, the infrastructure and all that stuff. But to the degree where you can step outside of it and reclaim a big piece of your own sovereignty, then you need to do that. You really do.
Yep, definitely. They don't make it easy, Money's the factor that keeps people in the system and stuff like that. And to do anything, you think you need money, So, but you have to try and become sovereign somehow, even though the world's about to end and financial collapses and all the rest of it, because Christ knows what's coming, and it's been a crazy, crazy ride, this world. And yeah, I've been a fan. I fell for the rock and roll thing back in the day, tried to be a rock star and tried to live the lifestyle and be wild and crazy, and got all these books of, Woodstock and Monterey and all the Jefferson Airplane and all this. And you think, oh, it's so cool, these guys. But actually, again, they were tools as well. They're getting used,
Yes.
They were fucking themselves up. They thought they were rock stars and living it, but actually, the companies didn't give a fuck about them. If they die, whatever, on the next one. Jimi Hendrix, great guitar player, where he had people feeding him drugs and telling him to do this or do that, So their life isn't as glamorous and stuff as it's sold. And yet, so many youth these days think it's still cool to get fucked up and emulate these people and live this debauched rock and roll drinking lifestyle. And that culture is very, very detrimental. The amount of alcohol. Notice alcohol never disappeared off the shelves, only toilet paper.
Exactly. Yeah, no shortage of vodka, that's for sure.
But again, if the world never drank for a year, it'd be a completely different place. People sobered up and focused on healing, but that's not the priority. People are still wanting to numb the pain of this world out. And it does take a certain amount of almost bravery to look at yourself and to say, I need to change. That's where people, fall down. Point fingers galore, it's everyone else's fault. But their own life, you can only change yourself and improve yourself, and people don't want to put that effort in.
No, they don't. I've said for a very long time, it's an individual journey. And you have to work on yourself first. See, the controllers want community-based stuff. They want communal thinking. Yeah, and when you think in terms of the community first, what happens is you are not working on yourself as an individual. And then what winds up happening is you have weak individuals. They're not resourceful.
Yeah.
They're not resilient. They're not creative. And so you have a community that has those same attributes. They're not creative. They're not resourceful, right? So that's why you have to work on yourself first. You have to be a very strong individual, be resourceful, be creative, be resilient. And then you form a community based upon strong individuals. Then you have a very strong community.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons why, like, your family is your community, right? It's a community. But the family has to have very strong, a very strong structure with regard to the mother and father. So if you have a very strong mother and father with good morals and ethics, good discipline, then the children, that community, the family unit, is going to reflect those types of traits and attributes. That's why they spent so much time destroying the family structure.
Yeah.
Everything they do.
What do you think about, obviously they've got these songs of the Beatles, but the lyrics and what they were saying and all you need is love and this hippie thing, and do you think there was anyone trying to do any good with these lyrics that were put out there? Did they actually inspire people, make them, because there's lots of songs like Hey Brother, Let's Get Together, Love One Another and all this kind of stuff, and positive vibe songs. Do you think there's somebody with a good intention behind some of that and putting the Beatles, or do you think that was all like the Madame Blavatsky kind of, new age kind of leanings or getting people to go down. I think it was more nefarious than enlightening. You know what I mean, with the Beatles lyrics and stuff.
Yeah, I think that there were songs, obviously, that had positive lyrics and good intentions, right? But the problem we have is that it is tucked in within the construct of an agenda.
Yeah.
Which is, it started off with the human potential movement. And that was, Willis Harman was heavily into that. He was a social scientist, and he was there with Theodore Adorno and everybody else from Tavistock, the Frankfurt School, the Rockefeller Foundation, and Stanford Research Institute, and the CIA and MI6. So it was a message it was a good message in a lot of these songs that was tucked within an overall agenda where they made you feel good.
Yeah.
And the message resonated, but they were not taking it in that direction. Do you follow what I'm saying? It's almost like, the way I kind of see it is, they dangled a carrot because they know what motivates humans. Humans by very nature, I mean, they're not violent. I don't know of anybody. I mean, this obviously is going to be people that are off center or whatever, who want to hurt other people. But the vast majority of humans don't wake up every morning and say, oh, I want to hurt somebody, or I'm going to do something bad today or evil today. They just want to get on with their life. They want to have a good life. They want to take care of their family. That's what they want to do. They want to hang with their friends. And, but I think that's what they did. I think they created a lot of songs where it was very feel good. But it was a carrot, and they just dangled that carrot along, and people followed. And then what they did was, then they threw the switch. Right? When you think about it, we don't have a lot of those songs anymore, Billy. We really don't.
No, I mean, it's totally
a lot of the songs today, like if we go into rap and stuff like that, and hip hop, a lot of that stuff is really nasty stuff. Not all of it. Okay. So I don't want to insult all the rap and hip hop fans out there, but I'm just saying, rap was created for a reason. And rap has that constant beat, the lyrics. It was created to be hypnotic right out of the chute, and to put people into a trance. And actually the vibration of music has a lot of effect on people's moods and so on. So that's what I think they did. Because I go back to a lot of songs and I love them. I love the song by Johnny Nash. I think it was Johnny Nash. I Can See Clearly Now.
Yeah,
I always loved that song. And I go back a ways. But
just on that topic, it could be a great song. It's really beautiful, but you probably heard the guy John Todd, who was in the Satanist and the record industry, and he says that they do these black magic. Again, that's just
rituals.
To do the subliminal and the master. So then, even if it's got positive messages on it, you're still listening to their intent, but even subconscious. So that's an element of it,
Yeah, what it is it's been a slow, methodical, incremental march. That's why I was saying before, the different genres are different components or different phases or stages of the overall conditioning program that they have out there. So there's a lot of good music out there. In fact, I was listening to an interview by Alan Watt. And Alan was saying that
they played at the end of an addendum.
At the very end of I put an Alan Watt, actually 2 Alan Watt clips at the very end of my new presentation, the addendum. And I don't know if this was in the addendum, but it was another piece I was listening to, and he said that because he was in the music industry, he was a studio guitar player, session player. A lot of people I don't think know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that. No.
Yeah. So he was saying that the word had come down at a certain point. I think it was in the 1990s or so, that music now had to be oriented toward gender neutral.
That's right. I was going to mention that during the interview, actually, so probably wasn't the addendum.
Yeah. So that was interesting, right? Because I thought about it and I said, really? So it went back 30 years ago?
Aye.
the whole gender neutral thing? And he said, yeah, the word had come down in the music business. No more like he, she, all that stuff. I mean, I guess occasionally going to get he, she, but they were moving the majority of the songwriting and what was going out into the public domain to be gender neutral.
Aye. Like,
Right. So you can listen to some of those
it.
songs. You would think to yourself, oh, yeah, that's a very inspiring song. But people are interpreting it based upon, how they're interpreting the song. Oh, he must be talking about a guy, or he must be talking about a woman. But in reality, there was nothing specific about a guy or a girl.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning. When you think about it, it was the beginning of the movement going forward. And look at where we're at today with the whole transgender agenda, right?
Yeah, scary.
Yeah.
But
so,
I've been a couple of workplaces recently. One guy was playing this rap music like 8 hours full blast, and I was losing my mind. It was so bad to see the vibrations of it and just the constant. Like I go on stage and whatever, I swear, but this was just OTT for the sake of it, and just like, calm down,
Yeah.
And then there's so many young people these days as well in this other place, and they're like this hardcore doof, 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 and it's like full on banging, and they're like it for 8 hours. I'm like, that is fucking horrendous. Okay,
yes.
that is just not music. And you try and play them some other stuff, and they just didn't get it and didn't like it. It's like, has humanity been reduced to that? God help us all.
It's conditioning, and that's the thing. Tavistock is heavily into sound as a way to mind control and to condition. In fact, in the Alan Watt interview, he mentions George Martin was a person who was an expert in how sound affects humans.
All right. Interesting.
Very interesting. So, I mean, I didn't know that. It wasn't until I listened to the Alan Watt interview that we got that bit about George Martin and some more about his background, because up to that point, I didn't know that he was an expert in sound engineering and how sound can affect the mind.
Well, I did send you a clip on Twitter. I don't know if you had a chance to watch it or if you're aware of this clip, but there was actually 2 tracks that George Martin recorded with, I think it was Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan.
Yeah.
And in 56 he done this. And if you listen to it, to me it's got elements of the Beatles kind of All You Need Is Love kind of production elements in it. And you're like, he was doing that in 56 and because it was a comedy thing. I don't think it actually got released until these days on YouTube. Have you heard of that track?
No, I'm going to take a listen to it. You send me the link?
I sent you a link to one of them, but obviously on YouTube you'll find the other one with a bit of searching.
I'll take a look. I'm sorry. I mean, I was so heads down with this addendum presentation that there was a lot of stuff. I'm just catching up with emails now, to be honest with you.
Aye, just the past couple of days I've sent it because I just thought, I wonder if you've heard it, because when you listen to it, it's like very Beatles, the horns and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, that's quite advanced, I thought, for 56. But yeah, it's an interesting one. So obviously, he said he had his background in comedy, but he was obviously doing music production and stuff.
He absolutely was. I mean, people don't realize that EMI gave the Parlophone label to George Martin.
All right.
So, EMI wanted to do something with the Parlophone label, and they handed it off to George Martin.
Right.
He got promoted, and he was given an entire label under the EMI umbrella that was his. So, look, you don't get to manage a label like that unless you're doing really good stuff in the minds of the EMI hierarchy. And George Martin was very talented. There's no question about it. And his role, I mean...
Well, John Lennon alludes to that as well, doesn't he? He says, George basically took us on board. We worked well with him. He could tell what we wanted. But really, he was practically saying, George is the man, almost.
Yeah, and the way John Lennon explained it, it almost sounded like they were a kid in a candy shop.
Aye.
Like, yeah. Oh, can you do this? Can you do that? And so George would say, well, how about this? And he would say, how about an oboe? And they'd be like, oh, what's an oboe? What does an oboe sound like? Right? I mean, this is how John was telling the story. And I was listening to it. Again, folks, this is in my presentation. And I thought, wow, they, you know, the way John's telling the story, it sounded like they were, yeah, like kids in the candy shop. And, you know, George Martin was the guy that was, you know, we could do a little bit of this, we could do a little bit of that. I'll sprinkle a little magic over here and a little bit over there. And,
Uh,
you know, and it's going to sound great, boys. Just going to sound just spectacular, you know, and it did. He did.
so what you've done to me with these presentations, you know, every time you watch them, you just get the feeling more and more just how regular guys the Beatles are, and
Yes.
how much can the shit's happened around them, and they've just been going along with it until obviously Billy Shears comes in. He's a bit more up the ladder, and he's took a role in it. And
Yeah. Yeah. Billy's like in the inner circle, right? So,
uh,
and when Billy showed up, that's when really George Martin's role got diminished, although it was him and George Martin for Sgt. Pepper. But once the White Album session started, you mentioned it earlier. Actually, George Martin walked out of the White Album sessions. He walked out. And we don't really see George Martin again until Abbey Road. So, and Abbey Road is a spectacularly produced album, right? So that's, you know, that has to be George Martin's, you know, fingerprints all over that, even though Billy was there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's the thing with the Beatles, right? So some people think like, oh, you hate the Beatles and this and that and blah, blah, blah. It's like, I don't hate the Beatles, okay? In fact, I've landed where you've landed, Billy. They were four guys that they got caught up in something. And I do believe they were groomed and handled from a earlier time in their life. But even their grooming and their handling, that's not their fault, right? There were people that were pushing them along. And if you're starting at an early age, let's just say they started preteen, teens or whatever, you know, I mean, you're being steered by adults, and kids trust adults, and you're being moved along the timeline, right? Climbing the rungs on the ladder. And, you know, they got themselves into something that was way above their heads, way above. And
I mean, there's interviews later with John Lennon, you know, talking about the Beatles in that kind of almost a derogatory way, and say you need to grow up to this interview, and the world's not like that and stuff. You know, it's almost like he's been pissed off that he's found out. That's what the whole Primal Scream album, people were telling him how he was used almost, and I think that was got his goat a wee bit. And yeah, but who knows? John Lennon, he went quiet for 5 years as well, didn't he? You know,
he went quiet.
Just like a recovery of how they were used, and again, then with Double Fantasy, is he the same John Lennon? Got to ask that, and you know, again, did he go and just want to join the industry? Did he have that talent to make that album with Yoko Ono, Double Fantasy and stuff, or is he just getting used in later life? And was he the truthful? Because he could have been involved in the Beatles, and then he's discovered it's fraud, and he comes out with Bagism and Peace and Love.
Yeah.
Was, you know, people that kind of got a lot of. When John Lennon died, we lost that symbol. At least he was the guy to speak up for peace and love and stuff like that. And that was a big thing, and almost like JFK in society, people felt that death. So that could be part of the operation as well, to kill the hero, you know, the peace and love guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I mean, John had a lot of, he wasn't you know, always a shining moment. I mean, it was, you know, there's a lot of stories about him and his abuse, with Cynthia Lennon and stuff like that, you know. But, you know, we don't know the extent of the programming and the conditioning that they were exposed to, you know. And in the addendum, the presentation I just released, in that interview, I think that was with Rolling Stone magazine, if I'm not mistaken, he called Bob Dylan a myth.
That's right, yeah.
Paul McCartney a myth. McCartney a myth, and he called the Beatles a myth. I mean, in that one interview. So I think, you know, John, I think he had become a loose cannon.
Aye.
You know, and when you're doing interviews and you're saying your best days were back in Hamburg and not when you were a Beatle, and the best songs were when I was not a Beatle,
Aye.
you know, this is not what the controllers of the official narrative want to hear. And when you think about it, when did John Lennon play any of the Beatles songs when he went out and played live? When he played, I think it was in Toronto, or he played in New York City. I think it was Madison Square Garden. I think he played Come Together, Madison Square Garden. But I mean, like, he didn't play In My Life. He didn't play Girl. He didn't play, I mean, pick a song.
The Ballad of John and Yoko.
The Ballad of John and Yoko. He didn't play any of that stuff. So you have to ask yourself, why is that? I remember reading a story from years ago where George Harrison was on tour and he was playing music, you know, his solo stuff, and he didn't play any Beatle music, and the crowd had gotten upset and they started booing him.
Right.
And even George, you know, he got sick and tired of talking about the Beatles, the Beatles, the Beatles. There's an interview he did with 57th Street. In fact, it's the same video that I got the clips in the addendum with Philip Norman, the author, where he was explaining how George was treated in the studio by George Martin. He was dictated to, you will play these notes, right? And, you know, even George Harrison, you could tell after the whole thing was over, there was not a lot of like warmth looking back at their Beatle period.
Yeah.
And you would think that for all that the band allegedly accomplished as songwriters, even George, right?
Yeah. Well, it's like the astronauts when they came back for the moon.
Exactly. It's the same thing, Billy. It's, you know, they just didn't look like they just had a shining moment.
Hey, we're the men. We know all that.
Yeah. And that's the thing, you know. That's what strikes me. And when you listen to John's music, especially post Beatles era, it doesn't sound anything like his Beatles period.
No. Yeah.
You know, he took a lot of shit for Sometime in New York City, you know, because the songs there, I mean, they weren't great songs. And he got clobbered for that by critics and fans alike, you know. And I remember reading another article where he said that, you know, he made a mistake with that.
All right. Is that an album? I've never heard that album of his.
Yeah. I mean, he had, you know, the first album, Plastic Ono Band with God and stuff like that. That was a good album. It was very raw.
Yeah. That's a classic.
Yeah, I love the album. But the songwriting is nothing like the songs that you hear 62 to 66 or even 67 to 1970. It's not, okay? We have the Imagine album, which I think overall is a solid album. Even though it's told in memoirs, he didn't write Imagine. It was generously credited to him. I think that's the words that are used in the footnote. But that's neither here nor there. I mean, just talking about the quality of the music that we're hearing. And I like Walls and Bridges too. I think it's very introspective, even though I think that Harry Nilsson had a lot to do with that particular album. So I don't know. It was a very different existence for all of the Beatles once they broke up.
Oh, aye, totally.
You know, especially for John and George. And even when you listen to Billy's music, you know, especially when he first got started, his first album is McCartney's solo album, and even Ram. I mean, I like the Ram album. It's one of my favorite solo quote McCartney albums, Billy albums. But you know, it's not really Beatle music.
Yeah.
So you have to ask yourself, what happened? Why is that?
Yeah. Basically, they had awesome songwriters, and it was a big, massive operation.
Other songwriters, other musicians, you know, studio players, and so on. And if George Martin wasn't producing, you know, because the producer has a lot to do with what that record is going to sound like.
Well, they called him the fifth Beatle, but to me, he was the Beatles, essentially.
He was the managing director of the Beatles psychological operation known as the Beatles or Beatlemania. There's no question in my mind. And George Martin was, his role was just, I mean, you can't overstate it.
Yeah.
He's the glue that kept it together, and he's the one that marched it forward, and he's the one that made it what it ultimately became. Him, and I think that working with Theodore Adorno as a social scientist out of the Frankfurt School in Tavistock.
Yep, and obviously enabled by all the right people to get on the right show and stuff like that.
Yep.
It's a huge operation. You've done a great job exposing that. What's next for you in the whole Beatles world? Have you got other things?
Oh my God. Well, you know, I don't know. I think I'm going to slow up on the Beatles stuff. I mean, after the addendum, as I mentioned in other shows, Billy, it's kind of like it's gotten to the point of diminishing returns, and I'm not interested in Billy ticker tape parade stuff, Billy Shears, you know, Paul McCartney ticker tape stuff, as he heads out. By the way, I will say this: a friend of mine who is very credible and who is, he periodically makes his way into circles where the beautiful people gather, said to me that I won't get into exactly what it is, but Billy has some health issues. I'll say it that way.
Okay.
And he is going to be 86 this year. His birthday is either September 9th or September 11th. That's what we deducted. He's not 80. Paul McCartney would be 80, but
Yeah.
he was 86. So
What's going on then? Is it?
that's what I was told.
But also, you do see sometimes a picture of him with his wife, but he's a different height compared to her.
Yes.
I was going to say though, February 21st was it? Or something?
Oh yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, February 21st. So, in memoirs it talks about February 21st, and I did ask Tom about the date, and he says, "Mike, I have no idea." He says, what the date means. He says, but it was there to be put in the book. So that tells you there's a certain level of direction that Tom is taking to, Tom
is not three authors.
No, he's not three authors. I mean, the people play, go find something better to do with your life than to sit there and play with anagrams. I mean, you can anagram your own name and come up with something. And then, and even if it says, he's three authors, I mean, so what? What does that mean? What does it mean? Where are you going to go with that? Anyway, that's just silly stuff. But the 21st, what happened was I originally, based upon some comments that had come through on my main channel, they said, hey, that's Shrove Tuesday in Catholicism, absolution, forgiveness of sins, and all that stuff. But then later found out that it goes back to an ancient Roman festival called Feralia, Feralia. Yeah, Feralia. And Feralia was all about worshiping and paying homage to the deceased, respect for the dead and the deceased. And the way the legend goes, in a particular period of time when Rome was at war, they didn't hold the festival of Feralia. And when that didn't happen, the spirits became restless and there were hauntings and all of that stuff, right? So that is what the February 21st date goes back to. It goes because Billy, as we know, right, he's an occultist, very much into the esoteric and mysticism and all that stuff, the mysteries. And so the 21st marked a period in time when he was paying his respects to biological Paul McCartney. And based upon what is in memoirs, it's telling us that date allowed him to actually detach his spiritual attachment to Paul McCartney. So in the book, it tells us that he has an actual spiritual soul attachment to biological Paul. That biological Paul's soul is attached to Billy's physical body, and so therefore two souls inhabit the same body. And Billy depicts this on his McCartney 2 album cover. So if you look at the McCartney 2 album cover, it's him, his face, the center of the album cover, and then there are two shadows, one to the left and one to the right. And the shadows in themselves have significant symbolism as far as the occult goes and souls. So some people are going to buy into that, others are not. It doesn't really matter whether you believe it or not. It's what Billy believes because that's his life, right? That's how he runs his life. And so that's his understandings and his philosophy and his spiritual leanings. And so the 21st marked a moment when he paid his respects to biological Paul McCartney based upon that festival, that ancient Roman festival. And I believe that that is the moment in time which he believes he has now detached himself from the soul or the spirit of biological Paul McCartney. And so what does that mean? I think it means that Billy now, he'll still be Billy Shears, he'll still be, quote, Paul McCartney, but he'll be able to go do more of the types of things and activities, music, painting, whatever it may be, that he as William wants to engage in without having to tie it all back to the Paul McCartney role. So that's what I think, because there's some people out there, it's just so many folks out there They just goes back to what I was saying before. The world is run by occultists. So there are key dates and stuff like that that are very important to them. Yeah. Because you don't know anything about it, and because you don't know what a certain date or a certain symbol means, doesn't mean that it doesn't mean anything. Right? Because I had some people say, oh, well, the date came and went, Mike, and nothing happened. I'm like, wrong. Something did happen. But you have to understand the occulted aspects of it to understand what really took place. You know, going back 2 years ago, I said, I don't know what was going to go on with that date. Was he going to pass? Was he going to retire? I had no idea. I just said that the date was in the book, and because it's in the book, it has some significance. We'll have to figure out what that means down the line. Well, we did figure it out down the line. You know, in fact, Kat from Supernatural Beatles channel also did a piece on it as well. Shrove Tuesday and the Festival of Veralia. So
yeah,
I wasn't
the channel. That's a really good channel. That
her channel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, her channel's great. It's she puts a lot of work and a lot of research into what she does, and you know, and doing the voiceovers. That's not easy stuff. Okay, so when I did the voiceover for the addendum, that was 30 pages, typewritten in Microsoft Word, you know, to pull that all together. And you know, she has to be doing the same thing. You're not talking off the top of your head. You have to gather your thoughts. You have to structure it. And then you got to tell the story. You know? So I recommend subscribing to her channel. Yeah.
Supernatural Beatles.
Yeah. Supernatural Beatles. Yeah. So that's it, Billy. I'm glad you asked those questions. And as far as next steps, I am actually in the process of recording the 10th song for my third album. It's underway. And I played it for my wife yesterday. It's just a basic rhythm track, and she liked it. Thumbs up there. And so I'm hoping to have that wrapped up within the next, 30 to 60 days. It takes time. And I'll have the third album out sometime this summer. And that's really what I'm focused on right now. That and my family. We have a grandson. He just turned 8 months old. And we've got the family coming over for Easter. So we got a lot of stuff going on, and I've got to take a break from this stuff. You just can't keep doing it all the time. It wears you out.
Well, you said that last time, and then I've watched about you in 4 or 5 interviews since then. I said, "I see Mike's taking it quiet," but
well, that's the thing. I say it, and then I get people contact me and they say, "Hey, do you want to come on the show and talk about this?" And there were people who contact me, and I respectfully decline the interviews. I really don't like doing interviews. As unbelievable as that might sound to some people, they might think, well, he likes to be out there. It's not true. I really don't like to be out there. I don't mind doing my own stuff. I don't mind doing my own presentations. But as far as going out and doing, perpetual, interviews, I don't like doing that, because really you wind up repeating yourself over and over and over again, Yeah. But this Thursday, I do have a follow-up with Crow 777, and that was because that was scheduled way back when. Okay, so this is something that was scheduled maybe, I say way back when, but 2 months ago or so. Going to do that, and then I don't have anything else lined up interview-wise. I did want to talk to you because you're one of my favorite hosts to talk to.
Thank you.
I always have a great time when we're together, and I wanted to get to you first with regard to the new presentation, the Addendum, because I know you watched it, and you ask really good questions, and you have a background in music.
Well, I was into rock and roll. I know the old stories. I can talk shit about them for ages. There was one documentary I watched in Laurel Canyon recently. It was hosted by Jacob Dylan. Have you ever seen that one? And it's got people like.
No, I've seen that pop up, and I meant to take a look at that one.
You should watch that, because almost at the end of it, who's Crosby, Stills, Nash? Graham Nash is in it, and the way they're talking, they've always got this wee smile on their face. It's like you're pulling the wool over folks' eyes here. So it's a knowing wink towards the end, especially. So it's worth a watch, that one.
Well, is that the one where Graham Nash says, and some people believe that Paul McCartney was in Wings?
That one, yeah.
And he has a smirk on his face? Okay, I have that clip, but I haven't watched the entire documentary.
I think I may have it. I'll have a look for it. I'm going to send you some other things. I'll send you that Rolling Stones documentary.
Yeah, send that to me too.
I'll look at Josie and the Pussycats, and I'll let you know if I've got this Laurel Canyon one. But yeah, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Mike. I'm always here if you fancy a chat. And anytime you want to shoot the shit, no worries. It's a great talking to you. You've done a lot of great work, so really appreciate that. And yeah, I love all your Beatles stuff. And if new information comes out, we can be sure that you'll be on it with bells on.
Yeah, if there's anything significant, I'll report on anything significant. But if, like I said, if it's ticker tape parade stuff, not interested. You know, so
cool. I've just put a wee link down the bottom there. I've not got a job these days. If folk want to donate to me, it's donorbox.org/Billy-Watson-TV. Thanks for your time, everyone, for watching. Check Mike out on sageofquay.com, and we'll hook up again sometime, Mike. In the meantime, take care and have a good day.
Thank you, Billy.
Cheers.